Well, we can't take our eyes off of the Middle East because so much is happening there. The latest breaking story comes out of the Jerusalem Post, and in this particular story, it's talking about the possibilities concerning John Kerry, and he's trying to put together this framework agreement. I want to take you there now because I want you to hear exactly what is being said. It's very important, in my opinion, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Let's go there right now and walk ourselves through this article. It's entitled Ambassador Shapiro Clarifies, Kerry paper drawn from Israeli-Palestinian proposals. The paper Secretary of State John Kerry is developing to form the basis for further Israeli-Palestinian negotiations is not solely composed of American ideas, but is drawn from what the Israelis and Palestinians presented, U.S. Ambassador Dan Shapiro said on Wednesday. Now, let me make clear to all of us, the reason this is so critical is because if they get this deal done, we start the final 7 years to Armageddon that day. Not only the 7 years to Armageddon, but the 7 years to the second coming of Jesus to the earth. It's one of the few prophecies in the Bible with a specific time frame on it. Does not have a specific date, but it does say when this occurs, you have 7 years left until the Battle of Armageddon and the second coming. Now, will that be 7 years in 1 day or 7 years in 2 days? We can't be sure about that, but it'll be right at the 7 year period. It'll become so obvious that there will be no question about it. So that's the reason why we're talking about this right now. And in particular, people have been saying, oh no, there's not going to be an interim agreement. We're not going to agree to it. But guess what? You're going to hear from this article that that's exactly what they're hoping to sign come April 29th. Now, if they get an interim agreement on April 29th, and if it contains 3 conditions, then that will meet the prophetic requirement for the beginning of the final 7 years. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, I can't tell you whether they're going to make it or not. But I can tell you, if they do make it, what it means for all of us. Let me continue. This is the article from the Jerusalem Post. As we continue our work at this stage to shape a framework proposal, it is very much drawn from ideas the parties have put on the table themselves, he said, in Tel Aviv at the annual international conference of the Institute for National Security Studies. Very little of it will be purely American authorship. There will certainly be a role for America to try to bridge some gaps. But much of what will emerge from that emerges from discussions between themselves. Shapiro said that this framework, if it is going to be successful in giving more time to negotiate a full agreement, is going to need to contain real decisions on the core issues, on all the core issues. Now, let me read that again. That's really important. Shapiro said that this framework, if it is going to be successful in giving more time to negotiate a full agreement, is going to need to contain real decisions on all the core issues. He indicated that the document will not just be a very rough outline of an endgame and is not going to leave as much to the imagination, although many details will need to be filled in, as was the case with the Geneva interim agreement reached in November with Iran. So the Obama administration is really into these interim agreements right now. What Kerry is trying to perfect is what I call the art of the interim deal. That's the words of Washington Post columnist David Ignatius. Continuing. Referring to the interim Iranian negotiations as well as the Palestinian track, Ignatius said Kerry starts on diplomatic issues he thinks are totally impossible and then tries to get elements that the sides can agree to, put them together into a document, and have that form the basis for negotiations to a broader, comprehensive deal. Now, as the article continues, he would probably say that I am willing to take risk for peace in the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, but not until I know that an existential threat for Israel in terms of Iran have been eliminated, Hadley said. Now, they're saying that we have two interim agreements on the table here. The Iranian interim agreement and the one in Israel they're hoping to propose between Israelis and Palestinians. So he is saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu would probably say, I'm willing to take the risk for peace in the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, but not until I know that an existential threat for Israel, meaning Iran, has been eliminated. So since they're attempting to get a final agreement with Iran, some people are saying, okay, we'll take an interim agreement now, but I'm not taking these risks for a final agreement here until I know I've got something that I feel totally comfortable with concerning Iran. Finally, the article said no date had been set for the framework agreement to be made public. I do not have a prediction for a framework rollout for a framework that does not exist, she said. Right now, the U.S. is focused on bridging the gaps and making sure the proposals from both sides are incorporated. Okay, now they did give a date for the rollout of the framework. It was supposed to be by the end of January. Apparently, they hit some sticky issues that prohibited them from doing that. Here we are now, February the 10th. Still, we don't have the framework yet. However, there are some other indicators that things may be getting close. This article says U.S. U.S. expects delay on Israeli-Palestinian peace talks carry framework rollout. Negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians will likely require more time than previously anticipated, U.S. officials acknowledged to the Jerusalem Post on Monday, that would be today, as the 9-month deadline for peace talks set last July by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is on the verge of expiring in 2 months. The article goes on to say, Netanyahu took note of this response during a Likud Beitenu faction meeting in the Knesset on Monday, saying Abbas's negative response came even though he knows there will not be an agreement without recognition of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. So, the Jewish people have taken a stand, and if you do not recognize us as a Jewish state, there will be no agreement. Abbas said, I will not recognize Israel as a Jewish state. The article goes on to say, now let's see if those same elements in the international community, which until now have placed pressure only on Israel, will make clear to the Palestinians what exactly the ramifications will be for them if there will not be an agreement. He said, without the Palestinians understanding that they will pay a price for lack of continuation of the talks, they will prefer not to continue the talks. Now let me see if I can get down to the crux of the matter, because they've been saying repeatedly that Abbas is not going to recognize Israel as a Israel as a Jewish state. However, recently, Tzipi Livni, who's the chief negotiator, said, well, maybe that's not altogether true. Now, let me just give you this article. This comes 2 days ago from the Jerusalem Post. It's entitled, Jordanian Parliament Against Recognize Israel as a Jewish State, but Abbas may do so, Livni hints. Now remember, she's been negotiating with the Palestinians way back in 2007, 2008, and thought they almost had a deal back at that time under the administration of Ehud Olmert. So now Livni is back, so she knows these people very, very well. So listen to what she has to say. At a meeting of the Ministerial Committee on Legislation dealing with a proposed bill that would mandate teaching that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, Senior Citizens Minister Uri Orbach said that for Israelis it was clear that the country was the nation state of the Jews, something the Palestinians will never accept. Livni, Israel's chief negotiator with the Palestinians, reportedly said to Orbach, "Wait, there will still be surprises. And if they are willing to recognize us as the Jewish nation state, will you be willing to divide the land?" she asked. Now, this is the person that's on the front row of the front lines. I've told you many times on this program that what you read in the news is not the entire story, because these negotiations are being held under lockdown secrecy. They know if everything's negotiated in the news, that it won't be long until there's nothing but infighting going on. So they have kept all this very much under wraps. But here Livni is. And they're saying there's not going to be an agreement because Abbas will never recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Now let me read her response one more time. First of all, what did he say? Senior Citizen Minister Uri Orbach said that for Israelis it was clear that the country was the nation state of the Jews, something the Palestinians will never accept. Livni, Israel's chief negotiator with the Palestinians, reportedly said to Orbach, "Wait, there will still be surprises. And if they are willing to recognize us as the Jewish nation state, will you be willing to divide the land?" she asked. Okay. Now, that's what's been going on over the weekend. What does it all mean? Well, number one, there's an agreement coming, period. It's prophesied in your Bible. I want to read the prophecy in the next segment. The only question is when. Will it happen by April the 29th? We still don't know that answer. But when the framework agreement is released by Kerry, then things are really going to get interesting. We'll be back in a moment.